Alleluia. Om Mani Padme Om. Allah Satnam.
Welcome. You're watching Harmony University, and today we're speaking with Zahid Ahmed. He's a Peace Educator at Deakin University. Thanks for coming back in, Ahmed. What sort of comes to my mind is that as a Pakistani, you've got a crucible of just about every element of conflict that you'd like to look for. What's the role of peace? Why peace education? What's the role of that there? How's that going to work?
I remember, teaching my students at a university in Islamabad, and I was telling them that to become a very good expert of peace and conflict studies, you don't have to go anywhere outside Pakistan. Yes, and that pretty much reflects the sad reality that we have examples of all kinds of conflicts, from ethnic tensions to sectarian conflicts, and then interfaith violence as well, and then the whole mess with the terrorism and the war on terrorism or against terrorists. So it's so when I'm talking about this and giving you these examples, like it has to go down to the level of the community, and at the level of the community, if I think of the situation 15-20 years ago, there was the time, and still in many communities there is a widespread, I would say, neglect, ignorance that is mostly that works in the favor of extremist organizations, and then also the in some cases terrorist organizations as well. And in Pakistan still a lot of studies have been done that explain that most of the recruitment in these extremist organizations is happening through face-to-face. Yes. It's unlike other places where social media is used as a tool. In Pakistan, still face-to-face, because it's a collectivist society. As I also talked about this in our last week's conversation, and I think it's important that in challenging those the extremist narrative with a counter narrative that can come from peace education as a tool. And in Pakistan, the challenge is that peace education still has a limited reach, I would say, because it's still there's no, I would say, there's lack of that political will at the national level that can take the limited peace education and its scope from the level of NGOs to the level of the state.
Yes.
And if that happens, then of course there can be reforms in the curricula, and in peace education the critical thinking is very integral to the peace education models, and that only state can do by training teachers and bringing in those teachers who can really produce critical beings. Then actually what is still happening in most of the cases, that teacher comes in a classroom, he delivers a lecture, there's no question and answer, and then he leaves. So it's pretty much like the reality for most of the students in Pakistan, and questioning is not encouraged at all. And that's where I think, and I'm a strong believer, and I would say I'm still firm in terms of my commitment to peace education, because I see the value that it can add to the society, and that's how we can build people's resilience and their own individual mechanisms to counter that extremist narrative or the extremist ideology to which they are exposed very regularly than I would say like at many other countries.
It sort of gives real impact to the phrase which was bandied about. You don't hear it so much now, but the hearts and minds of the people. The Vietnam War, they talked about the hearts and minds of the people, winning the hearts and minds of the people. But here's an example where it really literally is that. If you can't work at that base ground level with families, then it's not going to work.
Yeah.
But filtering that upwards, as you said, through NGOs to the government, how advanced is that? You know, on a barometer, you know, here's the top. How far up here is it? Is it really in its infancy?
It's stuck at the level of NGOs. It's stuck at that level, because at the state level, you know, especially I'm talking with reference to my home country, Pakistan, where I've spent most of my professional life and life otherwise as well. And I think at the level of the government it has to go to have a wider reach and a wider acceptability. There have been, you know, small initiatives around, usually that's linked to some internal or external events. So if something happens, it's a reactionary sort of policy. There's not that, it's like knee-jerk sort of reaction. There's not a lot of thought that goes into those initiatives. So if there is something that happens, let's say on the issue of attacks on non-Muslims in Pakistan, then there would be a reaction in the form of a conference focusing on interfaith harmony, and then there'll be few policymakers there. But that's it. You know, there you need to have a long-term vision and long-term planning, and also the policy that comes with an action plan to have more effectiveness.
So at this point it's pretty much totally reactive to those stimuli.
True.
Yes. So you as that peace educator, where do you, like, when you hang underneath an NGO, like you've only been back here for what? How long? 6 months or so.
Yeah.
So the last 3 or 4 years you've spent working in Pakistan on this peace education. Who do you answer to in that context? Where do you work with an NGO, for example? What's your role under them? What's the status that you have?
I've been, over the years, you know, I've advised a lot of NGOs, I can't even count, and international donor organizations as well, by giving them advice on what really works in Pakistan and what doesn't work, and also local organizations in developing peace education contents and training manuals, and making sure that, you know, their approach stands much better chance of success. And of course, it's and then in Pakistan, still a lot more effort has to go into localizing a field which is mostly Western dominated. Peace studies in itself is as a Western dominated field of study. A lot more effort has to go into this.
And the West is dominated, as everybody is, with time. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony University, and we're speaking with Zahid Ahmed, who's a peace educator at Deakin University. Zahid, you talked about developing programs in the previous sector. Could you give us an example of what a program might look like? You move into this area and you are going to develop a program and make recommendations. What would it look? What would be the basic core structure of a program like that?
You know, it varies a lot. It has to, you know, the first part of becoming a successful peace educator is that you need to know the context.
Yeah.
And the realities that you're dealing with, and of course still be very pragmatic in your approach, and in designing peace education training curriculum, or you know, just the contents if you're not delivering it yourself. And the idea is to, I'll give you an example of, you know, like I designed a peace education training manual for an organization working in Karachi with youth organization or youth groups in a context where there was a lot of gang war between various factions, various ethnic groups and political parties. So the idea was to use youth as a change maker. Yeah. You know, the future's leaders who are more in favor of peace than violence in that sort of setting. And then the whole educational program that I designed, it didn't just end with giving them knowledge. It's actually focused more on development of peace initiatives by the participants. So it became more action oriented, because the idea was also to engage youth in practical steps that they can take in achieving or promoting peace in their communities. And another thing, I talk a lot about innovative approaches in peace building, and recently I designed a program around that focuses on intra-faith harmony between the two sects of Islam, the major sects, Shia and Sunnis. And this is based also on my experience, that like I've seen that when the dialogue is happening, and that's the only place for interaction between the members of the Shia community and Sunni community, not much was achieved in terms of breaking the barriers. And then I've been actually promoting this idea of peer group learning in preparing people or the members for the dialogue in their separate groups, and then bringing them together. It's one of those experiments that you have to really do to see what you can achieve through innovative approaches.
And do you find that sometimes you'll come across inspired members of these various groups who become your lieutenants automatically, that they grasp it?
Many times like that, and whenever that happens, that's very accomplishing, I would say. And it doesn't happen very often, to be very frank, but whenever it occasionally happens, that's where I really see the value of my continued engagement as a peace educator, working for peace building, also in contexts that have actually these conflicts reaching boiling point very quickly, and then erupting into violence, and then there's a lot of tension, and it really challenges your skills as a peace educator, because it's the context doesn't stay the same.
No,
it changes on daily basis, if not on hourly basis, or and I recall actually talking to a lot of members of the trainings, from the trainings that I had offered on peace education, and many of them have actually initiated their own peace building projects in local communities, and that's very accomplishing actually to see that your idea can lead to something much more meaningful, and people actually becoming torch bearers instead of just passive sort of audience that listens but really doesn't reflect much on the contents of the training, and then not much is achieved.
Well, those torchbearers, do they have a particular profile, or age profile, or academic profile?
No, like community leaders, just common people. That's where most of my work has focused on, and this is again linked to my basic belief that if you really want to achieve the desired change with reference to the promotion of peaceful values, then you have to go out there and work with the people on the ground, and not work with a select group of leaders only.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, you did the Costa Rica education that you undertook. That was a fair while ago, and you've since done your doctorate here, haven't you? How have you? Your doctorate was when?
I did my doctorate in 2012.
Yeah.
So I came in Australia in 2008 and selected a university at a beautiful place called Armadale in New South Wales. Lovely place. I think ideal for someone doing a PhD, because it's anyways isolated from the rest of the country. But that was my preference also. I wanted more sort of a quiet place after my experiences mostly in conflict zones.
Yes.
So I needed that sort of time, I would say, or a break from all those experiences. And I think PhD offered me the opportunity to reflect on a lot of those experiences, and for my continued engagement in this field. And then, after my PhD, I went back to Pakistan and became the pioneer of the discipline of peace and conflict studies in the country. And I can proudly say that the seed that I sowed in the form of a PhD program in peace and conflict studies is the biggest program of any PhD program in Pakistan at the moment, with more than 25 students.
Well, that must be very gratifying.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And the whole idea of actually starting a PhD program before any other program was to produce first the people who can actually take care of PhD programs on various positions across the country.
And I need to take care of time. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. Watching Harmony University. We're speaking with Zahid Ahmed, who's a peace educator at Deakin University. Pakistan is your specialist area, obviously, and with good reason. Can you give an example of some of the initiatives, these peace education initiatives, which are taking place in Pakistan, which are good examples of the growth of the potential for peace?
In Pakistan, there's peace education happening at various levels. In Pakistan, sadly, we still have a segregated, fragmented education system. So for the poor children, there's the option of going to madrasas or Islamic seminaries. For the middle class, there's the option of going to public schools. And for the elites, there are private-run schools, and of course, they are expensive like any private-run schools. And the peace education interventions have actually targeted students in all those various institutions.
Right.
Peace education, began as a project for only madrasa student. And around 2002 and 2003, and in madrasas around the country, there were various interventions around training madrasa teachers who are not trained at all in teaching, and then also in changing the contents of teaching in madrasas to make it more aligned with plural values of respect and harmony and all that. In public schools, the situation is not very different as well. So there have been these interventions, and if I give you an example, I can think of now Jamia Naimia, which is a madrasa in Lahore, and its head, whose father in fact was killed by the Taliban for speaking about peace and harmony in the country, but he is still actually carrying this torch and this vision of his father and running peace education programs, not only for his students but also of teachers from other madrasas in the country. And I think you have to be very strong and dedicated to achieve that, because it's a very sensitive sort of context. And because there are conflicts on the ground and you have to work around those realities. And then there is a very interesting project, because in peace education I talk about two very essential things. One are the contents, and other aspect, the very important aspect, is the quality of teachers. So another example I can give you is of a private run school which is not receiving any funding from anywhere, but the teachers very well trained, very well educated as well, and they do some research at their own. Mostly they download content from the UN websites on peace education, and then they localize that knowledge, and they have regular peace education classes for their students, and then a very innovative youth-run project that I can think of. And all of these projects actually I studied in my national level research on assessment of the impact of peace education projects in the country. And then there is a youth-run project which is around, which is called Peace Entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm. All right.
So initially, some of the money is given as just like a microcredit.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the money is given as loan, and the youth then implements, the peace education or peace-related projects. And at the moment, they have, many successful peace related projects in the country by giving just the initial amount of money, and then those projects actually generate money. For example, through computer training centers, for example, by running peace fairs or peace melas, peace exhibitions, and other kind of activities. So the money is generated and the loan is paid back, and then the whole project is sustainable. And I've seen its impact and its value, because here you are not dependent on foreign aid to achieve something. So you're initiating something which is more sustainable. And I think the crucial learning here is that, and lesson for, I think, everyone who's interested in peace building interventions, that there is a need to think more about its not only the way it's the whole program is executed, but ultimately its sustainability. Often the aid comes for, let's say, for 2 to 4 years, and you go back in that area where the project was implemented and you see nothing. Because there was practically no focus on the sustainability.
That peace entrepreneurship is inspirational, isn't it? So where does the financing for that come from? Who's the...
Interestingly, in this case, there is a very good partnership now with the provincial government, which is like the state level government, in terms of the training and the facilities and all that. Initially, a lot of funding came from external sources, because you have to give loans. And then the organization itself started generating a lot of profit, and now they have their own, I would say, a pool of funding through which they keep on building, and they keep on expanding their initiatives around the country.
How about the security of the people who are initiating those things, particularly that madrasa that you mentioned, where the young man had taken on his father's role? How secure are they?
I remember talking to him, and he mentioned to me that he had actually received a couple of threats from the extremist groups. And that's when I remember telling him then to adopt a very conflict-sensitive sort of approach, because I also believe that you have to really live to achieve what you really want to achieve.
Yes.
And by being more conflict-sensitive, at least you give yourself, you provide yourself with strategies that can stand a much better chance of acceptability. Perhaps the whole journey would become much slower.
Yes, but you'd have a survival strategy.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we have a need of a survival strategy, because we are out of time. And look, Zahid, thank you so much for an in-depth analysis of this peace education. And thank you for your courage in doing it in Pakistan and doing what you've done, because that in itself is quite an achievement. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
You've been watching Harmony University. We'll be back next week. And thanks for watching.
Baha'u'llah, Shanti Om, Allahu